to I May Be Wrong.
I don't know what this world is coming to,
But I Don't Think So. We're broadcasting from the greater Nashville area, the home of country music, beyond the borders of political correctness and identity politics. Facts and faith are our demarcations. Truth lights our path.
Here's the Barry White of Podcast Radio,
The Venerable Alfonso Ashworth.
Well, welcome to another exciting episode of I May Be Wrong, but I Don't Think So. Of course, we got a lot happening. There's a lot to catch up on. I do have a great guest on that's in the queue. He's going to talk to us about federalism. The united we stand, divided we fall. Now, if you have some comments that you want to make in the chat room or on Facebook, please do. I see that Brother Darrell is in the chat room, Daniel Christer, and others. George Wallace is joining us as well. I know Pastor Wallace very well. He's a great man. And you should go and check him out on Facebook as well. Just look up Pastor George Wallace, and you can catch his ministry there. Also, look, folks, do not fall for the okie doke. The old okie doke, as they called it. Look, this is what's coming. Now you can mark this down, but this is what is coming, and it's coming sooner than you think. We're looking at a time they're going to call for mass or forced vaccinations. It's going to get to that point. They're already setting you up for it. We're going to get to a time where they're going to force people to have these vaccinations. I hate to say it, and I hate to say that I'm living during this time, that time is coming. You won't be able to buy, you won't be able to go into public places unless probably you have some type of card saying that you've been vaccinated for this coronavirus. They're already talking about it. I see Laverne Patterson is in the chat room. Welcome. Look, let's get started. Before we get started, I want to say one thing. You can join us every Wednesday at I May Be Wrong, but I Don't Think So. You can find us, of course, at I May Be Wrong, but I Don't Think So.com. You can also find us on Facebook Live. If you are a podcast person, you can find us on all the major podcasts. The easiest way to find the podcast is to go to my website, but we are on podcast. And if you don't catch the show live, you can catch it, of course, on YouTube. If you go to my YouTube channel and find us there as well. But we want to welcome everyone, and we're going to get started. I've got a great guest in the queue. He's been on before. He's someone that understands the Constitution and understands it very well. And we're going to be talking to him about a particular subject that I'm concerned about, and I know you are concerned about as well. But welcome to the show once again, Hal Rounds. Welcome to the show, Hal.
Well, thank you very much. Good to hear from you again.
Well, it's great to hear from you. I hope that you and yours are doing well. This virus is the scourge, as the president calls it, the silent or hidden enemy. But what I want to talk to you about, one, tell my audience what it is that you do. How can they find you for some of the information that we may want to share?
Hi, well, I'm retired from a career at a express company. Did 25 years there, and I went to law school and became an attorney while I was there. And I did a bit of domestic relations law. And then I retired, moved out to the countryside, and I've been doing this now for 20 years. My institution, when I went to law school, I was interested in it. I've been working on trying to spread the word about it for decades now.
Right.
And so the times we're in right now seem to be particularly poignant because people are not thinking of the Constitution when they think about how to govern a problem like a pandemic or alleged pandemic. And I think that we're losing track of what's precious about this country because we're not paying attention to the foundation.
And of course, you do write. You do you do an article. How can people find what you write?
Well, the actual printing of the articles in the Fayette County paper called the Fayette Falcon.
Okay.
But I also have a website called halrounds.com, and each week that is what I write for the subsequent week is posted there. So you guys can log on there, and you can communicate to me through that source.
Well, let's get started. And I've got questions, and I know that my audience, if you got questions, if you're in the chat room, or if you are someone on Facebook, if you have a question for Hal, please post it, and we will try to get him to answer it. But right off the bat, what is federalism versus, of course, what most people talk about in terms of the Constitution? Explain to the audience, what is federalism?
Federalism is the idea that a government is formed by a bunch of units that are semi-independent. They are federalized. It's like a confederation. We have the central government, the federal government. We call it the federal government, and that's been our national government. But each of the states has their own area of authority and responsibility. And one of the most important things about the Constitution is that it is designed to create that kind of a federal system where the central government has duties and powers, but they are listed. They're enumerated. They are very limited. And everything else, particularly reemphasized in the 10th Amendment, goes to the states.
Okay. That I understand that. But why does most Americans don't get it when it comes to the powers of the local, the state, and of course, ultimately, the federal government? And I think the president is trying to explain it, why he is unable to do certain things, because that's the responsibility of the governor. And how is that being confused with this pandemic that we're under at the moment?
Well, okay, now that gets into a long talk. The point that is, I think, you got to preface this problem by saying our educational system does not teach the Constitution. I mean, they talk about it, but they don't teach what's in it. So the limitations in the Constitution on what the federal powers are have to do with national and international interests. So, for instance, we want to have one money. There's an authority for coining our money. You want to have international relations. There's a provision for treaties and things like that. When it comes down to something that happens within the state, you know that the Constitution doesn't even actually provide for a murder statute, because that is a murder is a local thing, and the states have that authority.
Okay.
All right. Now, it's been stretched because of bad education.
Okay.
And the idea that when a person in charge of some governing function sees that there's a problem, first of all, people go to them without thinking about which level is really responsible for what's going on. And they say, oh, help me solve my problem. And whether it's a theft or a murder or traffic laws, they tend, particularly with the media focus, and the media are horribly ignorant, they think, well, if something is wrong, the federal government needs to be what's fixing it. And that's not true. But if it's said often enough, people come to think that it is true. And so when a pandemic comes, or an epidemic, whatever you want to call it, we have all turned and pleaded with our federal government to solve the problem. The federal government has the authority in the Constitution to come to a state's aid when there is a request by the state legislature for help with insurrection and riots and that sort of civil violence.
Right.
It does not have a provision for coming to the state's aid, even if the state asks for it, when there is a tornado or a hurricane or an earthquake or an epidemic.
Got you.
Now, Now, there is a provision that states can make arrangements among themselves to handle problems with the approval of Congress. So if you get a bunch of states setting up a compact to, let's say, the southern states to deal with hurricanes, they can do that and have a regional or even a national emergency management authority.
But it has to be done through the states, not the federal government.
That is the way the Constitution is designed, yes.
Then why are we waiting for the federal government to fix this pandemic?
Ignorance and panic.
Well, would you like to expound on the panic? Because I can tell you the panic is leaving us, stripping our freedoms, and I see it coming. I don't know how you feel about this, but of course, this is opening Pandora's box as to how things are going to go going forward, especially if another pandemic that they're talking about in the fall, maybe this comes back again, or maybe it comes back again next year. How do we address this as the people, the United States, the people? How do we address this if they decide, let's say, for instance, if they decide that everyone should have the vaccination, and that is a law that you have it? What kind of rights would we have?
I can't imagine any functional authority in the Constitution for a national law like that. But I didn't think there could be for Obamacare either. And look what happened.
Right.
Okay. And the other thing is, because we are so afraid of bad things happening to us, we tend to yield to somebody who says, I have the solution and I will protect you. And if you have flown on an airliner in the last 20 years, you have already begun to surrender your right to be free of unreasonable searches and seizures.
Right.
Because you said, oh, you got to protect me against terrorists.
Yes.
And that's TSA.
Exactly.
Every person who works for TSA has sworn to uphold the Constitution and then immediately gone and performed a function that is forbidden, and that is searches without warrants.
Without a warrant.
Cause.
You know,
exactly.
I addressed this. I played the Bill of Rights last week on a podcast, and people don't even know their rights. Sherry Orange says, "How I am deeply concerned with this pandemic." You know, Sherry. And of course, I think a lot of people feel like Sherry. We are concerned about the pandemic, but I'm also concerned about how the government is taking away our freedoms.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And I'm concerned about potential house fires.
Yes.
But it's not the federal government's problem. First of all, we need to be well informed, and the media are failing us in that regard.
Exactly.
They present news to us in the way that will excite the most rabid emotions. All right, and so we have to temper our understanding for that. But my wife is, probably me too, because I'm such a geezer, a highly susceptible person relative to the, they call it the coronavirus. I like to call it the woo-hoo flu. But
yeah, the woo-hoo flu.
We live out in the country, and we have only been making necessary trips into town. And so we're being responsive to the potential threat, but I don't think it's right for the government to start saying, okay, here you're going to have orders to stay at home. And particularly in Tennessee, there are two parts of the Tennessee Code that have been referred to by Governor Lee and by the county mayors and so on, and that gives them the authority, they think, to tell us we have to stay at home except under certain circumstances. those two statutes don't really have anything to do with medical situations.
Exactly. And I had someone ask the question or make the statement, what about shutting down and fines for churches? Where does that fall under this conundrum?
Well, I think that there's a fundamental prohibition against shutting down churches, period. There is a huge wall of protection. When they talk about the wall between the state and the church, the wall is to protect the church, not the state.
Exactly.
Right? and when you say, okay, well, we're going to shut down your church because, of medical situation or terrorism, anything like that, that is something that simply doesn't exist in the federal authority and by extension through the 14th Amendment to the state authority. Now, once you have gone to church in a situation, let's just say they have the authority otherwise to establish a curfew. Now, they can't stop you from going to church. And I have to say, there was an event back when I was in the Air Force where I was restricted to headquarters, restricted to my barracks. And yet my wife was in town at the time, and they couldn't keep me from going to church. So that's where I went to meet with her. But in any case, the idea of once you've gone to church and mingled with others who may be have the virus, there might be some curfew that keeps you as a second level from doing certain things, but they can't stop that part where you're going to church.
Right. And I think that's what's confusing so many people is who decides what is essential. For example, are liquor stores essential? Because they fall under the authority of the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. But churches are not essential because of the potential that you may spread this virus. Is that legal? Is that something constitutional?
I don't see it being constitutional, no. It's so hard to say, okay, something is not an essential. If you look at everything in our economy, it's woven together like a fabric.
Yes.
And you're pulling out individual threads saying we need these, but we don't need all the threads that hold them in place.
Wow. And, okay, I can understand what you're saying, and I can relate to the constitutional versus, let's say, the moral obligation. Maybe we're morally obligated to not spread the virus knowingly. As you stated earlier, if I know I have the virus and I still go to the public, then I could be held responsible. But we have no way to know that unless we are infected or unless we're tested. Now, since we're not all being tested, I just don't see how they can make a blanket edict that says, well, no church under no circumstances unless you do it electronically. I'm afraid that is sending us down this slippery slope. And next it's going to be, what is it going to be next? What kind of pandemic or disease or something else that's going to now give them some other reason to take some of our rights away? For example, the Second Amendment. I could think of a scenario where they could say, look, everybody needs to turn in their firearms because of the safety of this problem. Where do you see that going, Hal? You're the expert. Please tell my audience, where should we be really concerned?
Well, we've passed the point where we should have started being concerned. The what do they call it, assault weapons ban of the 1990s. That's been 30 years nearly, and we lived with it for 10 years without rebelling. This country, this is an important month. April was the month that our revolution started. And for the people who don't know it, you've heard about taxation without representation and the Boston Massacre and all these other things that the British were doing to the colonies. And yet none of those actually stimulated a revolution. The thing they did that stimulated the revolution was when they tried to take our guns at Lexington and Concord.
Exactly.
And that was that led to the shot heard around the world, not the whine, not the demonstration, but the shot. Okay? And when we allowed our guns to get regulated, really starting in 1968 or so, I'm sure that the Kennedy assassination and Martin Luther King, these were traumatic national events, but for them to turn around and say, okay, because we're scared now and this horrible thing happened, we're going to take your rights away. Why did we yield to that? So we are way down the slope. We aren't just beginning to be on that slippery slope. And we should be standing up as citizens and doing what our founders did and saying, all right, no more.
Well, that's what I've been saying, and I've been getting a lot of pushback because I've been telling people, look, you have been imprisoned. You have been imprisoned, and you're not even trying to challenge your charges. The charges is basically that, and if I'm wrong, you please correct me. The charge is that you could be infecting others. Well, how can I be infecting others if I don't know if I'm infected or not?
Well, morally, that's a difficult thing, okay? And you have to understand the practicality of it and all that and so on. When it's a disease like that, yeah, there's some things that as citizens we should maybe change our behavior as long as we're aware of it.
I'm agree.
Aware of the threat. Like right now, I'm complying mostly with this isolation thing.
Got you.
And that's to protect me, but it's also, let's say I've been infected. It'll be protecting others as well.
Got you. I'm with you.
That's just a moral maturity thing.
Got you.
If I know that I have AIDS or the coronavirus and I go out there and purposely, transfer it to some poor victim,
then that could be criminal.
Yes, it's assault.
Yes.
If you know it and it's, it'd have to be tested in a court of law, just the degree of responsibility you have. But we need to make sure that when we're in that court, that the laws, that the laws cover the authority that are prosecuting me.
Exactly. And I think people don't understand this clearly as to what they're giving up. Or the needs of the few are outweighing the needs of the many, so to speak, as Karl Marx them tried to imply or to impress upon the people, that we have gotten to a point to where we are afraid of, someone says boo and we jump and then we give up a right.
Yeah.
Thinking that we're somehow safer because we did so. I'm just not willing to be that easy to say, well, just because Dr. Fauci or Dr. Birx or the World Health Organization says this is a pandemic, that somehow that means we should shut down our economy, shut down all communications as far as contacting one another to some degree. But we pick and choose what is essential and what is not. Maybe I'm too hardcore constitutional, but I just believe the Constitution.
Oh yeah, well, that's the whole thing. If we have a foundation and we don't stick with it, then everything that's built on that foundation begins to crumble. And we're losing the thing that made America great.
Exactly.
Individually, each of one of us, what you're doing with the podcast here is the kind of thing people need to do to protect our country. I mean, I'm proud of you.
Well, thank you, sir.
I know the Constitution, but I'm not a good organizer. How's that?
Well, it takes everybody. Well, I appreciate you, Hal, and I appreciate your knowledge of the subject. And I think that most Americans, if they really knew understood the Constitution, that most of us would be doing the very thing that I'm doing, and that is challenging our government. That is the core. That is the power that we have, the ability to challenge what the government is saying and what they're doing. And I think that that's important. That should be the message that comes out of this, that just don't just take the government's word for it because they said so. Question the government. Okay, you got a minute. Go ahead and tell my audience how can they get in touch with you if they got more questions and get involved.
Well, what I really would like people to do is to join a group, and not all groups have all the answers, but there's a bunch of groups out there. There's Act for America to keep us alert to the Muslim issue. There's John Birch Society in many ways has done some good things. There's some things I don't agree with them on, but get active and educate yourself as best you can. I think listening to this show is one part of doing it.
Well, I appreciate that, sir.
And then, if you want to take a look at my website again, it's halrounds.com, HALROUNDS. And not a whole lot there, but each week there's something new to read. And if anybody wants to go through that site or directly to you, Al,
yes,
and get in contact with me, I will go 100 miles in any direction and for free present to a group a short subject on the Constitution or my overall day-long course on it.
That's a great idea. We need more of that. And Hal, I really appreciate you taking your time to spend this few minutes with me. And of course, my audience, they really appreciate it. And of course, others that are commenting have give you kudos on your comments. But thank you, sir, and God bless you.
Thank you, and bless you too.
Of course, that was Hal Rounds, constitutional attorney. He's been on the show a few times and has helped me out tremendously comes to some of these subject matters. And I see that those Diane Harp Navarro is in the chat. Carl Edis Mitchell III. Thank you, Pastor, for joining. Sherry Orange for supporting the show and also supporting me. Sherry and I go way back, and her father was a great American. He recently passed away. We miss him tremendously. And I want to thank all of those who are being a part of this show, being a part of what we're doing so that we can continue to go forward. Please support us. You can go to I May Be Wrong, but I don't think so.com. And you can, of course, support this show and others. There are millions of people out there that are trying to get this message across. And I'm going to tell you, it's coming. Mass or forced vaccinations on this virus is coming, folks. They're already talking about it. Bill Gates has already hinted at it. He's just calling it mass vaccination. He's not calling it forced, but it's coming. How they're going to force you is that you won't be able to do commerce if you don't have evidence that you've been vaccinated. So it's coming. But I want to thank everyone for joining me today. Don't forget, of course, go forth, defend that Constitution. And I'm going to say, God bless you. God bless America. And God bless our children. Peace.
You've been listening to Alfonso Ashworth, the Barry White of Podcast Radio. Go forth and share his message. I may be wrong, but I don't think so. Remember, no two people can ever occupy the same place at the same time. You were uniquely and wonderfully made. Born an original. Don't die a copy. God bless. Peace.